Welcome to a study of this week's portion. And in the next couple of minutes, I want to share with you a few points from this week. So we begin this week in the portion is a combination of two portions, Behar and Bechukotai. Behar means on a mountain, Mount Sinai. Bechukotai means my laws, my rules. And it concludes the book of Leviticus. Next week, we'll begin studying the book of Numbers. Tonight, I want to start to share with you a few points from the portion of Bechukotai. And would like to read the text and discuss few points. So we begin on page 826, chapter 26, verse 3. The verse reads in the following: If you pursue the study of my laws in order to guard my commands and observe them, then I will give you rain at a convenient time. The land will yield its produce, and in the future, even the trees of the field will produce fruit. God, in other words, tells the Jewish people, if you study Torah and obey my commands, I will provide you with many blessings. The first blessing God is speaking about is giving the rain in the proper time. As those of us who speak a little bit Hebrew, the word is gishmechem be'itam. You rain in time. The question that comes is, what is the proper time for rain to fall? Rashi tells us the following: you know when is the right time for the rain to fall to the ground and to allow the earth to produce? בשעה שאין דרך בני אדם לצאת. The proper time for rain is when people don't go out of the house. כגון, for example, בלילי שבתות, Friday nights. On Friday nights, everybody is at home celebrating Shabbat, sharing times with family. You don't go out to the movies, you don't go to a bar, you don't go on a business trip, and therefore it is a blessing when rain falls on Shabbat. Anytime Friday night or Shabbat early morning there is rain, we always say it's a blessing because God is showing that he cares and provides the rain, not at an inconvenient time like during the weekdays where people are busy. So the proper rain, gishmechem be'itam, geshem, rain, be'itam, in the proper time is on Friday night. That's Rashi. However, if you pay attention to a prayer we recite every day 3 times, the prayer is called Shema. In the second chapter of Shema, we see something very unusual. God tells us, "V'haya im shamoa tishmeu el mitzvotai," if you obey and listen to my commands that I command you today. God says, "V'natati metar artzechem be'ito yoreu malkosh." The translation is, then I will grant the early and late rains of your land at the proper time. That's in the Chumash that we study on page 1193, or the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 11, verse 14. Rashi, in V'hayim Shamoa, when it says Be'ito, in the proper time, Rashi comes up with two times. Rashi says the following: Be'ito, in the proper time, Beleilot, at nights, Shelo yatrichu etchem. So it shouldn't bother you from your day-to-day life. You should be able to go to business, go to school, and do whatever you do. At night, everybody is asleep. That's when is a good time to have rain. Davar acher, another explanation, Beleilei Shabbatot, on Friday night, שהכל מצוין בבתיהם, because everybody is at home. Ask the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, why by V'hayim Shamoa, Rashi chose 2 explanations, that rain is a blessing any night. And Rashi uses a second explanation that also Friday night. Here, God says, "V'natati gishmechem be'itam." Rashi says, you know when is the right time to give rain? On Friday night. And the Rebbe explains the following. There are two ways of looking at a blessing for the rain. There is one way from the perspective of the humans. For a human being, it's much better when rain falls once a week, only on Friday night. The rest of the week is dry. Everybody can go on their business. The farmers can plow, can walk on the field. The factories can go. The buses drive. There is no puddles. Everything is working fine. But that's only from a human perspective. But from the land perspective, from the farm, from the field, having rain only once a week is not necessarily a great blessing. It is far greater a blessing when rain comes every night, because the field needs to yield fruit and grow the crops. And in order for it to happen, it must have rain continuously, not just once a week. That's why in Vayam Shamoa it says, "Venatati metar atzechem." It's talked about the land, Beito. God over there is speaking about from the perspective of the land. "Venatati metar artzechem beito." I will provide the rain for you land in its proper time, and for the land it's proper to have it every night. However, from our perspective, in this week's portion, "Venatati gishmeichem," I will provide you with rain. From our perspective, it is far better to have it only once a week. And the miracle is that once a week will suffice as if it was every night. Talking about rain, Israel is motivated by the Kinneret, by the Sea of Galilee. I'm sure you hear it. And in Israel, the mood of the entire country is affected by the height of the Kinneret, how high the water level is. And Google search, if you go on Google and you search Sea of Galilee water level, you will see that it's a very high search number, because Israelis live by it. The news always, they start by telling us, oh, the rain has added so many centimeters to the Sea of Galilee. It reached now the red line, which for the last 16 years has not been so high. This year is a great, great blessing for the Kinneret, for the Sea of Galilee. The fact that it brought a lot of storms, people died, many buildings collapsed, there was no electricity in many parts of Israel due to the heavy rain, does not detract from the joy and the pride that the Israelis have about the Kinneret. Even though that today the Kinneret provides between 2 and 4% of the water carried needed for the Israelis. Used to be a lot higher. Today, for the desalination, that is able to, they have devised a machine that can take water from the ocean and provide provide water. The Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, is not that crucial anymore. But because of the tradition that it was providing almost 50% of the water for Israel, the national mood is dictated by the rain. Actually, Israel is always suffered, plagued with drought. If you read in the Bible, in the Talmud, you'll find drought is all over. Elijah the prophet, it's the biblical time. There is a famous story of Elijah the prophet where there was drought for 3 consecutive years. And that's when he needed to prove a miracle that there is only one God. Later on in the Talmud, we read about a famous rabbi, Choni HaMe'agel. Anybody heard of that rabbi? Raise your hand if you heard. No. Lily heard. Choni, there was a famous rabbi in the Talmud, in the Mishnah time. There was drought. The students came to him and say, we're dying. And Choni prayed to God. There was no answer. Nothing changed. So Choni made a circle. And he got inside the circle and he says, God, I'm your servant. I take an oath, I promise, I swear, I'm not leaving this circle until rain starts. And at first it trickled, very little droplets. And Choni said, that's not enough. I need to fill up all the cisterns. And suddenly a very heavy rain came, and Choni said, God, I need a rain of blessing, not a rain of curse that destroys the country. And suddenly proper rain came. 200 years later, we find about Rabbi Akiva. There was no water. Rabbi Eliezer, that's the Talmud tells us. Rabbi Eliezer went and prayed and begged God and nothing happened. And Rabbi Akiva turned to God and said the following. He decided to become the cantor, the leader of the service. And he says, Avinu Malkeinu en lanu melech ela ata, Avinu Malkeinu lemancha rachem aleinu. And that's where, and suddenly rain came. So the rabbis realized that this prayer is so powerful that they adapted it to the high holidays schedule of prayer. So there is no difference in the nusach, in the tradition. You may be Sephardi, you may be Ashkenazi, you may be from any part of the universe. Every single Jew on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur will recite the Avinu Malkeinu. There are 26 Avinu Malkeinus, but they are based on the Rabbi Akiva Avinu Malkeinu. They realized that Rabbi Akiva was able to achieve a miracle by saying those prayers. But then we read about 200 years after Rabbi Akiva, I'm sorry, not 200 years. The student of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's the one who celebrated his Yortzeit, his day of anniversary of passing, this week on Tuesday. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Talmud, the Zohar, the book of Kabbalah that he composed, relay a story. The students once came to him and he looked at them and he said, I see that you are coming to talk to me about a disparity, about disappointment between God, the husband, and his wife, the Jewish people. There is an issue between them. Is that where you need my help? And they said to him, yes, there is no rain. It's the second year of drought. We need a blessing. And Rabbi Akiva said to them, come and let's sit down and study Torah. And he opened up the book of Psalm and he recited, Ine ma tovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad. It's from the book of Psalm. I'm sure you heard that because it's a famous song. And he says to his students, you know what it means? Ine ma tovu manaim, how beautiful and nice it is. Shevet achim gam yachad, when two brothers are sitting together. It refers to not just physical brothers, but spiritual of between God and the Jewish people. When they are facing each other, looking at each other, then they love each other and they are helping each other. What happens when the husband is unhappy with the wife? He looks away. When he looks away, he will not fulfill the needs of the wife. And so he said to them, and if you will follow God's commandments and you study the Torah, God will turn back to us. And as they are studying Torah, suddenly rain start falling upon the Jewish community in Israel. The Lubavitcher Rebbe points out that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't need to go and beg God and fast for the rain or threaten God. All he needed was to study Torah. When you study Torah, God provided the rain. More importantly, the Torah study was about loving and caring for a fellow Jew. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, many times when people would find reasons why there are calamities and pogroms and terrorist attacks, some would say, oh, you talk in the synagogue, some say you don't keep kosher. Everybody will come up with reasons, and the Rebbe was adamantly against that. And the Rebbe always said, the best shield to protect us is Ahavat Israel, loving of a fellow man, and that's the motto of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai chose that verse to study with the student who came to him, because that's what will break the barrier between us and God. I want to move on to one more point at the same idea that we're studying, verses 3 to 6. We read, God said, I'm going to summarize it. We read that God says to the Jewish people, if you obey my commands and you follow and study my Torah, I will provide you with rain. You will be busy. The land will yield its fruit, and you will be busy harvesting and plowing. You will have no time in between because you'll always be busy, and the field will yield in a bountiful produce, and you'll have no war. There will be venatati shalom ba'aretz. I will place I'll grant peace in the land. V'cherev lo ta'avor be'artzachem. There is no sword that you will be facing. You will be sitting under your trees and be able to enjoy life and be able to appreciate your family. This is the verses 3 to 6 or 7 or 8, and it continues. The question that the rabbis were talking about that I want to address now is why God, the Torah in this week's portion, is only speaking and mentioning physical rewards for observing the mitzvot. After all, the real reward is Gan Eden, is heavens. The real reward is pleasing God. The real reward is afterlife, to be with God, or the time of Messiah. Yet the Torah chose none of the spiritual reward, the real true reward, but the Torah chose peace in the land, plowing and harvesting, no fights and no animosity in family members. These are, so to say, small change. Of course, it's nice, but that's not the real reward for obeying God and studying Torah. How come the Torah is not talking about spiritual reward? Actually, there are 7 different answers. I want to go over very quick, and then I'll share with you the Rebbe's answer. Rambam, Maimonides, whom I love dearly, Maimonides says the Torah is not talking about rewarding us. The Torah is talking about enabling us to serve God. When the Torah says, "V'natati gishmechem beitam," I will provide you rain in the proper time. V'cherev lo ta'avor be'artzachem, there will be no sword crossing your land, and you'll be busy plowing and harvesting and keep busy with that and nothing else on your mind, and no enemies crossing your land. It's not a reward. It's the ability to study Torah and obey God's commandments. So he's not talking about reward. The Torah is not telling us what the reward is. The Torah is promising that if we make a resolution to serve God and live a life of the Jewish tradition, God will alleviate the burden of protecting ourselves, of providing means to live by, of being able to celebrate our families. It will all become a lot easier, and it will not take so much effort because our effort will get involved we will be busy with studying Torah. That's Maimonides. So Maimonides says there is no reward here. It's just God's condition of when he demands that we follow his commandments, he is providing us and promising that as soon as we are resolute in our behavior, he will alleviate all barriers and all challenges. The Ibn Ezra says the Torah wants to teach us something that we can relate to, and the Torah wants to tell us things that can make sense. If God would have spoke about spiritual reward, it will have no sense, no common sense. We will have no understanding of spiritual rewards because after all, we are physical beings. And therefore, the Torah chose physical, material reward because that's the only thing we can relate to in our day-to-day life. When someone tells you, you don't have to worry about making a living. When someone tells you, don't worry about terrorist attacks, it's something that we can relate to, and it makes us serve God even to a greater degree. That's why the Torah is mentioning only material reward and no spiritual reward. The Bechaye, Rabbeinu Bechaye, a famous rabbi, he says that this reward, God is talking about a miraculous behavior. And that does not apply to spiritual reward, because spiritual reward is the natural outcome for committing ourselves to God. The miracle is that nature will change just to reward us for what we deserve, and that's why the Torah is mentioning only reward that is miraculous. The Kuzari says that the reason the Torah is mentioned only physical material reward, because the Torah specifies these rewards for the skeptic who denies that everything is orchestrated by God. In order to convince the skeptic, physical proofs are more effective. This is in case you have someone who is skeptic about God's commitment to us for serving him. And that's why the way to alleviate or to stop the skeptic from wondering, God is showing us that the reward is a physical reward, so nobody should question whether it's the truth or not. The Kuzari, I'm sorry, this is the Kuzari, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, he says that in the time of the Jews living in Egypt, they came from a land where they worship idols. And they worry that all their goods is coming from the idol they worshipped. All their sustenance is provided by the idols they worshipped. And that's why God needed to tell them, don't worry, you have to worship me, and all you need in sustenance will be provided. Rabbeinu Nissim, two more, very quick. Rabbeinu Nissim, Sam, I don't understand the question. If you read 11 and 12, verse 11, it says, I'll place my dwelling in your midst, and my spirit will not be disgusted by you. And the second verse, number 12, says, I will stroll among you, and you'll feel comfortable with me. So he said there is spiritual reward just few verses down the road. The Ikarim, another book, he says that the Torah is talking about rewarding the entire nation. Spiritual reward is based on the individual. Physical reward, materialism, is based on the nation. That's where we are responsible for one another. If you need rain, the rain is not going to go just for one specific individual. If you need protection from enemies, if you need to be able to harvest a lot of produce, that you'll be busy until the next season for plowing and start plowing, it is a blessing that is universal and generally includes all the people in the land. When it comes to spiritual reward, it's about the individual based on their behavior in specific way. And that's why the Torah is talking about physical reward and not spiritual reward, because physical reward is about the entire nation. Spiritual reward is about the individual. So we have about 7 answers. The Rebbe points out the following. The Rebbe said that for us as Jews, when we committed ourselves to study Torah and obey God's commandments, it's not a side issue. It's not an added coat that we wear, but it's part of our essence. Just the Rebbe says, like the Talmud says, that the Jewish people are fish in water. If you take the fish out of water, there is no way the fish can survive. The Jewish people without Torah and mitzvot, there is no way in the world that they can survive. So it's not something they accepted upon themselves, and they are also having material needs and spiritual needs, and that's who they are. Instead, they are one entity where spiritual and physical are blended together as one. Just like the fish without water will not be able to survive. And that's why measure, says the Rebbe, measure for measure. The Jew is busy in this physical world serving God in the physical material universe. You need to take money to put in tzedakah. You need to be honest with your words when you do business. You need to assist the poor. You need to keep Shabbat with physical food. You need to light candles. There is no spiritual activity involved as much as physical, because the physical involvement is the greatest, is the lion's share of serving God. Therefore, measure for measure, the reward is in the physical side of the human, but it is only in this universe. And the reason God chose to give us the reward, the Torah, in the physical world is to show us that physical reward is part of who we are. As human being, the physical aspect of a human being is Jewish and holy. Just like the spiritual aspect of the neshama, the soul, which is spiritual, so is the good deeds. Every time I have an opportunity to walk to synagogue, every time I have an opportunity to cheer up somebody, visit the sick, or assist someone who is needy, or observe any of God's commandments, we do it in the physical realm, and that doing is just as much as doing in the spiritual aspect, and therefore God wants to tell us that it counts just like a spiritual behavior. So the reward is in this physical universe because it achieves the same kind of behavior. One more thing I want to show with you before we say goodbye. the blessing of the fruit of the field, there is a two different approaches to the messianic time. Rashi, in the same verse, verse 5, if you read, if you see, Rashi says that even non-fruit bearing trees will yield fruits. According to Rashi, Mashiach, Messiah, when he arrives, it will create miracle in the universe, where not only the entire universe will change with no jealousy, no animosity, no hatred, but even the trees, non-fruit bearing trees, will yield fruit suddenly. They will provide us with sustenance. That's Rashi, and many, many commentators, by the way. Maimonides, on the other hand, totally disagrees. Maimonides said that when Mashiach will arrive, the nature will never change. The world will continue the way it was, the way we know it. And every time the Torah talks about miracles, like the tiger will graze with the goat, and a little child will be on a plane with a viper, it's a symbol to nations, representing different nations that are arch enemies to each other, that they will be able to get together and live side by side and live together and help each other. But actually, miracles, says Rambam, I have no idea where it's coming from at the time of Messiah. The Rebbe points out that the Talmud tells us that there are two ways Messiah can arrive. One is like a poor man riding a donkey, and another one arriving on clouds. And perhaps Rashi and Rambam disagree about this. According to Rashi, Messiah will arrive miraculously on clouds, and therefore the entire process will be a miracle. Maimonides believe that the Messiah will arrive on a donkey, just like a poor man, and suddenly he will start speaking God's words, and everybody will fall in love with that man and obey him, the entire universe. So Rambam, Maimonides take the approach that it's all natural and normal, and Rashi takes the approach that it's all miracle. Says the Rebbe that perhaps Rambam, Maimonides also agree with Rashi, except Maimonides wrote Jewish law, the book of law. And by Jewish law, we have a mitzvah, and the mitzvah is to bring Messiah. And therefore, you cannot perform a mitzvah miraculously. Anytime a person perform a mitzvah and he did it by miracle, it does not count as a mitzvah. A mitzvah counts only when it's done in the physical boundaries of nature, within the boundaries of day-to-day life. Therefore, says the Rebbe, Maimonides was forced to explain Mashiach as something that is very, very simple and natural process, no miracle, because Rambam is talking about the era of Maimonides is talking about Jewish law, and by Jewish law to bring Mashiach as a mitzvah, it's one of the 13 principles of our tradition. It must be done in a natural way. Will the world change afterwards? Of course it's possible, but as long as we perform the mitzvah in the natural sense, without miracles, then we qualify as serving God. After that, it can happen just like Rashi is saying that it will come by clouds. And that's pretty much the end of our discussion for today. I am very, very grateful that you joined me and stayed the whole time. And I want to remind you that tomorrow is preparation for Shabbat. We'll sing at 6:30. We'll sing some of the Shabbat prayers. I hope that Steve Howard will be here to help us tomorrow. And again, Saturday night, we will have Havdalah service at 9 p.m. And then we'll watch the Rebbe video. Last week was an amazing video, and I don't think you want to miss it. And I hope to be able to get together. I think things are getting a little bit better in the state of Florida. And I hope that in the next week or a little whenever, we will be able to get to see each other face to face and socialize with social distancing, but socialize as well. So I want to wish everyone a good Shabbat Shalom. And if anybody any question, please.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbos, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbos.
Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you.